Hello, and thanks for coming to my talk. My name is Ahmed Bakir, and today we're going to talk about getting social with the Facebook SDK. Cool. So, first, I'm going to answer the questions I always get. So, first question: who is this guy? I'm the lead developer and founder of Dev Atelier. We do app development and consulting. So, people come to us with their ideas, and we make apps. I've been working on iOS apps since 2009. Before I was doing iOS, I was a firmware engineer. I was doing router firmware for Cisco, like keyboard drivers. iOS was like something I did for fun because keyboard drivers are not fun, or they're fun to a special type of person. Um, but sometimes that kind of person needs a break. So, all right, next question I always get: show me your apps. So the first app I'm going to talk about connects Me Drive. This is a file manager app I did. It's a companion for the Me Drive hardware NAS. A NAS is like network accessible storage. The idea is you plug in like a USB drive or a USB hard drive into the little box. The box goes in your router, and you suddenly have a networked hard drive. It's cool because it finally lets you sync between like a USB and your iPad or your iPhone, and so you can copy like vice, back and forth between the two. You can do movies, music, documents, really cool stuff. This app is kind of notable because it won Editor's Choice at Macworld 2013 from Mac Observer. Cool. So the next app, Video Scheduler. Video Scheduler is a video modeling app for autism. Video modeling is this concept where you can break down a task into steps and then teach by going through those steps. So you're teaching someone how to wash their hands, or teaching someone how to do the laundry. The problem is that teachers would be doing this manually, or they'd be doing it through pictures, and they'd have to repeat it several times. With this app, a teacher can record the videos, set the order, set requirements based on the person's disability, and then give it to the student, and they can be autonomous. So we made this free for a couple of days, and while we did, it became the #1 education app. So that made me really proud. Cool. The next app, the app that brought about this talk, is Entango. Entango is a San Diego-based startup. They do a classifieds app. What makes them stand out is it's a very fast, beautiful app, and it's very local. So, you're looking on Craigslist, it's a wall of text. This one, it'll find where you are. You'll be like, I'm in San Diego. You'll say what you want, like I want TVs in San Diego, and then you can see it like in a very filtered list, or on a map, or just a list of photos. Really cool app, a lot of social features, and they just got a lot of content. So right now they're at over 5 million listings. Cool. So now the most important question: what will I learn? So the idea of this talk was I was doing a lot of social API work, and a lot of that stuff was Facebook, Twitter, and I thought, hey, I should share this with people. So first, I'm going to tell you how to get started with Facebook development, like if you've never done it before, what it requires. Second, I'm going to talk about how to authenticate with Facebook, like how to enable people to log in with their Facebook account, like add that sign in with Facebook button. Third, we're going to talk about how to access user details. This is something like you want somebody's friends list, if they give you permission, or you want to see their likes or something like that. So, and the last item we're going to talk about is how to post to the open graph. The open graph is like when one of your friends is playing, I don't know, like Bejeweled or Candy Crush, and then you see a message on their wall saying, I don't know, Adam has given 30 life in Candy Crush, right? Those messages are posted by Candy Crush to Facebook's quote-unquote open graph. So I'll show you a little bit about how to do that. Cool. So what do I need to get started? I recommend the latest Xcode. You can get it from the Mac App Store. At the time I wrote this, it was, I think we were at iOS 6. But really anything, I would recommend anything over 6. The thing with Apple is you need to have they have a list of compatible versions. Your SDK that you're running and building against needs to be on that version or greater. So just keep track of that when you're writing your app. You need to compile on the latest that they'll accept, otherwise they'll reject it. I would also recommend getting the latest Facebook SDK. When I wrote this, it was at 3.2. What I like to do is, instead of like downloading a copy and then keeping track of it that way, I like to do a lot of my projects now in Git and then fork like my dependencies as submodules on Git. And really the way it works is, when you're usually checking stuff out of Git, you do git clone. You clone it as a submodule instead of just like a regular clone of a regular repo. And then that way, later on, if you just want to update one module, like update the Facebook SDK, you can do that, and it won't break everything else. It won't, like you're using Facebook and then using like a special SDK to do like a heads-up display. You can update one but not the other. It's really cool, really easy way to keep track of the latest version of software. And then finally, the last thing you need is a Facebook developer account. This allows you to access the developer portal to make new Facebook apps. The one caveat is you need a Facebook account. If you don't use Facebook, if you don't want your work stuff related to your personal stuff, what I recommend is making like a second account, like an account for just work or an account for just development. Just some account that you can play around with. Based on how you feel about Facebook, that's cool. But, just remember that to do development stuff for them, they require having some kind of account, so get that. Even if you're not really going to use it for other than development, get it. And the big links to remember here are, you can always get the latest Apple SDKs and Xcode from the Mac App Store, so get it there instead of try to manually download it. Clone from GitHub for the SDK, and then developers.facebook.com for all your Facebook developer stuff. Cool. So next question, why should I integrate Facebook? All right, so the biggest reason, the reason I implemented a lot of apps, aside from Mantango, is to minimize sign-up friction. So the idea with this is when you separate people from what they're trying to do, like when you separate them from trying to post a classified or trying to play a game, and then you force them to go to another app, or you force them to go into like 5 sign-up screens, you're much less likely to get them to come back. Like, they're so much less likely to get, through 5 or 6 login screens and then play your game on the 7th screen. So with Facebook, we just have like a Facebook button where they can click it, and it'll fill in all their, like their username, preferred like default username, email address, and all they have to do is confirm it. Super easy. It like brings that, it could bring a sign-up screen from like 5 or 6 screens down to 1 or 2. So they're more likely to keep using your app after that. Second reason, single sign-on. This is something like when you're doing your work email, or when you're at work and everything goes through Exchange, right? So like your emails through Exchange, you can log into your email through Exchange. You can log into the wiki through Exchange. You can log into your source control through Exchange. It's an account that follows people around. Caveat here, it's an account that Facebook controls, so you will be beholden to what they allow and what they don't allow, but a lot of people use Facebook. So, third reason, you can engage your users. So what I mean by this is, like it's kind of like sales. When you have like a hot lead, it's way better than like a cold lead, like a cold call. So like, you want to play a game, right? And your best friend, we'll say your best friend Sally, right? Your best friend Sally is posting about how much she loves this game, right? For most people, they're more likely to engage when they get like that recommendation from a friend, from a person they trust, or like a movie critic, right? When you have other users posting about how much they love your app, that means a lot more than just some random guy or some random advertisement telling them to get this app. It engages people. They can like post content from your app, share it, a lot of fun stuff. So you want to build a community, and Facebook will help you do that. So the third is like boosting your viral coefficient. What do I mean by this? This is kind of like a new startup-y term, but that means like kind of getting that snowball effect where people keep talking about your app. And it goes back to what I was talking about with engagement. So, if you're letting people promote your app through a platform that they're all using anyway, like Facebook or Twitter, and they keep talking about it and they keep resharing the same link, that helps generate traffic. So people ask me all the time, how do I make an app viral? I don't know. I'm a developer, right? I bring together developers, designers. You still need to market your app, but something like this will help you. So, cool. All right, let's stop being overly excited, and let's get back to things to remember about Facebook. So, things to remember about Facebook. Facebook gives you a lot of cool things, but they also it's also kind of like Apple, where it's a platform that they control and you're using their platform. So first thing to remember, that they always deprecate features. So you may be using one version of the API and you'll be able to get like a friends list, and then maybe you can get like your friend's favorite color from that. But next version, they may remove that. They control the platform, so they control access to it. Remember, when you're developing, that stuff can change. So like if you're doing a business, when you're doing your business model, or when you're doing like something for the app, don't bank on it always coming from Facebook, right? Like you may want to start building in your own failsafe. Like maybe we can get this from another social network, or maybe we can like keep a copy of this information ourselves. Second thing, like so many other open source libraries and software development libraries in general and products, the documentation is often out of date. It's really annoying. It makes my job hard, because I really want to tell you that you need to go here for a tutorial and it'll always be up to date. Facebook's problem when they like do a complete revamp of their SDK, like I think when they went from version 2 to version 3, is that they got in tutorials for version 3, tutorials, some videos, but then the big, help system was still on version 2.0. So when you're looking for help with Facebook, they're almost always going to give you tutorials. So start there. Start with the tutorials for the latest SDK, and then start looking around, all the usual suspects like Stack Overflow, and, try to ask questions where you mention the version number, or try to look for other questions people have asked with your version number. So, third thing, getting back to the walled garden, Facebook has an app store, and the idea with the app store is you have an app that's Facebook enabled, and they may or may not promote it. The problem is they may or may not promote it. They have requirements for the App Store, like you need this many hits, you need this much traffic, kind of like they do for company pages and likes, like you need at least 40 likes to get analytics. Big difference is they don't tell you what the Facebook App Store requirements are. They don't tell you if it's like 10,000 a day, if it's 1 million a day. It's one of those things they leave intentionally vague. And a lot of times, the big guys they reach out to kind of drive the platform. So now that I've finished scaring you, let's get back to the task at hand. So let's talk about how to get started. So once you have your Facebook developer account, the first thing you're going to do is sign up for an app ID. An app ID is you basically say, my app's going to use Facebook. So what do you need to give it? You need to give it your bundle ID, like the one that comes from Apple, the reverse URL, like com.devatelier.catalog+. You need to give it your App Store ID, not like your Apple like login information, but the unique number that they give you for your app. Like it should be a hexadecimal number. You should also give them the landing page URL. So this is like devatelier.com/catalog+. It's when people, the idea with this is if people have the app installed on their phone, they'll try to launch it via the App Store ID. If they don't, they'll send them to the homepage, to your landing page, so that people can download the app. It's not required, but it's recommended. I also recommend having a backend server. You need a backend to be able to do Open Graph. So, like you're saying, oh, he posted 30 life from Candy Crush, right? well, you know, if it was engineered a different way, you could just send that message to Facebook and there it would be. But the way they do Open Graph, you need to have like a server, like a PHP server or Perl or whatever, that's going to have some basic schema information on these items, like on what life is or what a classified post is, so that they can display like a web optimized version of that. Cool. So how do I get started? Clone the latest Facebook SDK. As I mentioned, you can do this. Git clone the URL. You could also do git submodule init with that same URL, and then that'll add it as a submodule. You also want to configure the Facebook SDK. It's in red. This is kind of annoying, but this is how I do it. This is my workflow. After I've gotten the latest version of the code, I run their build script, and then build script will generate the framework files like the .as. It'll generate the .framework, the .bundle. I really wish they would distribute it pre-built, but this is how it is. So remember, to get started, clone the SDK or add it as a submodule, and then run their build script. They also have documentation. This is documented on their site, but you're going to find it in GitHub documentation as opposed to the Facebook developer. Cool. So how do I authenticate? First, I'll give you a high-level overview, and then I'll talk about some code. So in the high-level overview, what you want to do in your app delegate, the main class, the mother of all classes, is you're going to include the Facebook SDK, like facebook.h. You're going to give it a configuration dictionary with what permissions you want, and then you're going to start setting up your state handlers. So what I mean by this is so the way the Facebook SDK works is they have their own library, or sometimes it'll communicate with a Facebook app. So for some workflows, it may take you out of your app into Facebook, but then when Facebook is done, it'll come back to your app. And so you have to set your state handlers in your app delegate so that it knows how to go back home. Finally, for something a bit more specific, that coming back home, you're going to initiate the login from, like, I call an authentication controller, like a screen that's like sign up with blah, blah, blah. And there you're going to do a similar state handler to handle like changes in the session state. So the session will go from login type unknown to login type successful, login type failed. And remember, you can do that in the authentication controller instead of the app delegate because it's specific to there. When I say specific, that's something like he pressed cancel, right? So I shouldn't kill the entire app. I should just cancel the authentication controller. Cool. So let's get into code. So to include the Facebook SDK, there are 3 steps. After you've built the framework from that build script, you'll be able to find a Facebook SDK.framework file. You'll also be able to find a framework SDK resources.bundle file. So add both of those to your project. The usual way where you drag and drop or you add them to the project directory. And then finally, import facebook.h. When you have the .framework file, it'll give you the .as, the .h, so you can include these libraries. The resource bundle will also give you like resources like images and a couple of controllers to work with. So remember those 3 steps. Add the framework, add the bundle, and import the .h. Next, set permissions. So when you're on the web interface for configuring your Facebook app, you can kind of see it. You can see an echo of what's happening, but a good starting set of permission, and it'll actually show you all the possible configurations, but a good starting set, what I like to do is I just like to give people permission to get an email address and the read streams. The read stream is like posts and stuff that they do, like user activity. You actually have to set 2 permissions arrays. You have to set one for read and write. And for write, most of the time when I'm doing an app, the use cases are post something to their, post something to the person's wall, be able to quote unquote read the stream, like get access to old irrelevant data, and then get access to their user information. So getting back to that, on the write permissions array, I'm just going to request public actions. And on the read, I'll get the stream and the email. The idea with this is you could request all the permissions in the world. There are like so many combinations, but you don't want to be one of those apps where when they're trying to authenticate with your app, it'll say, this app wants 40 permissions, right? Pare it down to the ones you need. Cool. So, third part, we need to set up our session handlers. So the big ones with this are app state changes, like your app went to sleep, your app got killed, and session state. So, like the login is authenticated or the authentication has failed. So let me start showing you code, the thing we've all been waiting for. Okay. So the big one is when the Facebook app goes away and tries to come back into your app. So in application, so the way this works is they give you they do it through URL schemes. URL scheme is a special URL. It's not like HTTP, something like Facebook : // You implement the application open URL source application delegate, and then on there, as part of the framework, they give you a class method called handle open URL. And then you give it your active session, the session that came back from the Facebook object, and the URL that came back. And he'll be able to parse stuff from there. Like he'll be able to parse, oh, his user is successful, or his username is this. URL schemes are really cool if you're not using them in your apps already, because they let you pass parameters between apps. So like you're wondering, how can I don't know, pass something like my username from one app to the other? Or how do I pass, I don't know, a wish list of my favorite stuff from one app to the other? If you set up a URL scheme correctly, you can kind of get that to happen. So, second big exercise is when you open up your app for the first time, right? You don't want to make your user log in every time. So they give you an event called handle did become active. So in your app delegate, you set up this. This is where it's confusing. You set up this delegate method. You implement this method. Application did become active, and then within there, you call the Facebook the handle did become active message on the Facebook session object. So this will try to authenticate, and if it fails, it'll give you that prompt saying you need to log into Facebook again. Third big one is we need to handle what happens when we kill the app. So when we kill the app, we don't need to stay logged into Facebook. So you can just call the close method on active session. And we do that by implementing application will terminate. The big thing about all these is these are delegate methods, that your app can, you don't have to define, you don't have to declare them and define them, right? They're defined as part of the UI application class. You just implement them. So cool. So that's app state changes. So that's stuff that relates to our app dying, or our app getting closed, or our app opening up for the first time. Now the second big one, session state. This is where we get the wall of code. So this is a Facebook specific delegate. Similar, when you import facebook.h, you're going to get the declaration for it, so we're just going to define it. And so the big thing here is what we want to do is say, after we get the session state from handling the open URL, after it's processed it, it's going to call this, and we want to see what happened. Was it a successful login? Was it a failure? Should I display an error? So the way I do that is I'll take the state parameter, right, as you can see at the very top, switch state, and I'll check what our parameter came back to. Luckily, they give us macros like state open, state closed, login failed, and I'll implement my code there. This switch statement is basically a copy paste from Facebook's documentation, but the idea is if the state is open, if it's a valid session, then cache the session information or get related stuff I need. If it's a kill, if the session got killed or the login failed, then you want to try to close it, clear the token information, and get it again. So you just call close and clear token information on the Facebook session object. Now, that's handling the state, right? That's handling the message that came in, but how do we echo it? How do we echo it to the user? So two things. You can use, well, first I do a notification, and the notification name is session state change notification. This is another object that, well, this is another method that comes from Facebook. So the way this works is you say, I am posting, I got a session state change. I want to post this object, the session object, with this message, change notification. It'll fill in the rest. The last thing we want to do is error handling. So with this, if you've used NS error before, the general idea is if you have an error, the object's going to be an actual object. If you don't have an error, it's going to be nil. So if the error is not equal to nil, if it actually has an object in there, I'm going to show an alert view saying error, app failed, or error, blah, 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 error string. So a really easy way to do that is there's a property on the error object called description. So usually I'll say error, and then in the message parameter I'll put in like error description. Good stuff. Cool. All right, so the wall of text continues. Hopefully not too bad. A lot of this is comments. But now that we've kind of told the app how to handle the session state change and how to handle like closing the app, starting out for the first time, we want to log in. So this is code we put in our authentication controller, like the one that does a login. So the big thing with this is, remember, we're going to be making calls via a delegate. So when I say delegate, like if anyone, when you have like a class that only has one instance of it, but it's used throughout your program, usually we'll call it a singleton. So I'll make a singleton for my app delegate, and then I'll implement this common stuff there, like the stuff that's always going to happen. So what I do here is when I'm trying to log in, this is in my authentication controller. When I'm trying to log in to Facebook from authentication, I will call isOpen on the Facebook session object. This one comes from facebook.h. And then if it is open, right, log out. Or so basically what this means is someone is trying to log into Facebook for the first time in the app, right? Maybe like they got the phone, it's their girlfriend's phone, and they need to log in with their account. So I'll call close session. Otherwise, I will present, if it's not open, if it's closed, I'll present the login UI. So with this, the reason, not to contradict myself from earlier, but the reason that I'll say, make these calls from the controller, the authentication controller, but keep your common logic in the app delegate, is to remove like duplication of code. So the closed session method doesn't really have anything specific to the authentication controller in it. It's just logic that kills the Facebook session, right? Like we mentioned earlier. But we need to call it from this method, or we need to call it from this controller. We need to call it from this screen. And in there I have callback logic where when it's done, go back to where you started. And similarly, when you open the session with login UI, it needs to know where what screen, it needs to know what screen you initiated it from, but it doesn't need to know anything really specific about the screen. It needs to just know, like, I need login information, I should pass it somewhere. So big idea with this is make your calls from your authentication controller, but then try to put them somewhere where you can reuse the code often. Because you don't want to have a login screen, a sign up screen, and then like a logout screen that all copy the same code, right? It's going to be horrible to debug. Cool. So next thing. So when you're writing your authentication controller, you may need to do something specific for the session state. So when we open up the app right? We want to just check, is the session active? But when we're opening up the authentication controller, like when we're doing the login or sign up, we want to, we need to override that so we can get some specific logic out of there. So basically what I'm doing here is when you set a notification, the way notifications work is you say, I'm going to post this message like session state did change, and I'm going to give it an object. But how does it get listened to? The way it works is it's like you're in a crowd and you shout, Ahmed, I have a telegram for you, right? You shout it at the crowd, but, someone named Ahmed will respond to it. And so, there's two steps. The controller that's going to make the call posts the notification. Then the controller or class that's going to respond to the call says, I'm an observer for this. So what you can do here are two things. You're going to override the session state changed handler, the guy that responds to the observer, and say, okay, I'll call my login method, or I'll call my did not login method to handle, session state change. And then in your authentication controller, you're going to say add observer. I'm an observer for this method, so that when these calls come back and it goes out to the crowd, it comes back to the correct place. Cool. And then part 3, how do these methods work? So to go back, the idea was with session state changes, you want to say I logged in or I did not log in. When you log in, basically most of the time for most people's flow, what happens is you get the authentication information, and then it's going to have information like their Facebook OAuth token, when the token expires, and their user information. So looking through it, we have our user info object. We have the token information from that. But then we need to get user info. So how does this work? It used to be this information would come for free when you authenticated correctly. The way it works now with Facebook is you have to make a request for the user's information specifically, and it'll be in there. So for me, if you're not familiar with blocks, this is an example of a block. If you've done Java before, a block or JavaScript, like for example, when you're doing jQuery, right? And in jQuery, you say the handler for this is this function that I'm defining right now. That's what a block is. So they give us a block implementation for a Facebook information request. The way it works is it's Facebook request connection, start with graph path, and completion handler. The completion handler is a block. It's like that anonymous method that's going to get called when we finish. So the information I'm requesting is information about me, the user who's logged in. And the result is going to be a result object at an error, and then information on the connection. We're not going to use the connection information, but in here we're going to use a result and the error. So what I do in here is I will check if I did not get an error, right? If not error, if error is not equal to null, then get the information out of it. So I was showing a little loading spinner. I'm going to hide it, and then I'm going to cast the result object into a dictionary, because when I inspected it in the debugger, I saw this is a dictionary. So I'm going to cast it, and then we get the keys out of there. So the user info object gives us, it has fields for username and email, but they're not populated with the initial login. So here I'm going to take those fields from the dictionary and put them in, from the Facebook request dictionary, and put them into my user info. Cool, and then at the end we just hide it. So the next big one, did not log in. This is if they canceled the login or they failed. This is pretty straightforward. Really all I'm doing is, if they canceled, I'll show a cancel error message. If it failed, I'll show a failure message. Okay, that's login. Quite a doozy. Uh, I would recommend going through this, checking out the PDF of the presentation, and looking through the documentation repeated a couple of times till it makes sense. It's not as bad as pointers where it's not going to make sense for years, but it does take quite a bit to remember that. And remember, the big items are changing the session, handling the app state, and then handling what happens if the authentication passed or failed. But now we're going to talk about user information. So, user information, like what we noticed in the last couple of slides, is what we get back depends on what we request and what's in the permissions array. So, if we're requesting user information, we'll be requesting me, but it'll only give you information on the me request if you have read stream, if you have that read permission set. So, when you're going through the documentation, you're picking what you want to do in the app. Remember, if you don't request that permissions array, if you don't set up correctly when you initialize the app, you're not going to get the information back. Next thing, the data is returned as an NS dictionary, and the dictionary implements the Facebook Graph user protocol. So this means the dictionary, dictionary key value pairs, but it's supposed to abide by these rules of what a Facebook Graph user is. So it should always have, like these fields, or it should expect these methods. So finally, the last thing is, as we noticed in the last slide, when you want information on the user, you need to do a request from me, and you need to handle the response from me. Cool. So let's go into some code. So Open Graph, right? So Open Graph is being able to post to Facebook, but they've also streamlined into how do you request from Facebook. So like we showed last time, you'll do start with graph path. That's the method that lets you, that's the method with a completion handler baked in to let you do a Facebook request, like get information on me or get me/feed, and also give you a place to handle it. So same logic as last time. On the Facebook request connection object, do a graph path request, and then handle the response. So here we're going to be a bit more robust. So I want to get the person's username, their user ID, and their user email from Facebook, and echo that in my app. So when I get the result dictionary, I'll take those objects and put it in there. So yeah, this is a lot like what we did a couple of slides ago, but just remember, there's a lot of information in there, but you only get back what you request, what you ask permission for, what people agree to give you permission for. And one last big tip, if you don't use the debugger a lot, the bottom pane of Xcode gives you full access. Well, it doesn't give you full access, but it gives you access to a stack trace, and it gives you access to the LLVM debugger, which is basically upgraded version of the GDB debugger. And what I'll do there when I'm debugging a lot or trying to figure out what's in a dictionary is I'll type in PO dictionary, or where dictionary is the name of the object, like user information or result. And they'll do print object and show me the contents of that object. That helps a lot when I'm debugging. Cool. So we're getting in the home stretch. And we're going to talk about how to make an open graph request. So this is like posting that you gave life in an app. So the first big thing, when you're setting up your write permissions, make sure you do a publish stream. If you don't have publish stream, you can't post to Facebook on behalf of a user. Second thing, in your controller, like your like if you have a controller that does sharing, right, or as a post screen, specify the command you want to do, like whether you want to post to their feed or whether you want to post to a friend, and then put in a specific connection handler to handle that. So let's show you some code. So posting to a user as well. So we're using the same API. Well, we're using a similar API to what we had before. When we were getting information, we would do Facebook request connection. Facebook request connection, start with graph path, right? When we're posting, we do start for post with graph path. and then we specify where we want to post, like me/feed, the object, the parameters we're going to give it, and then the completion handler. We know the completion handler. Like last time, it's the same thing. Here, if it fails, I'll show the error. If it doesn't, I'll say it completed. Big things here. Facebook will have, when you do, well, with this method, you will give it a dictionary of your parameters. Follow that dictionary. It has specific requirements on what they should be, what's allowed, what's not, and then do the post. Cool thing is, if you don't do it correctly, it'll give you an error. If it does do it correctly, it'll go completely well. So, good stuff. Just remember, a big thing here, when you're posting, instead of getting, you do start for post with graph path instead of request, information. Cool. So posting to a custom command. So, they give you the baked-in commands like, but if you, or share, but say you want to do a custom verb, like, you want to do a custom verb like tango, like I tangoed with this classified, right? Whatever a tango might be. Something specific to your users. Where before when we did a graph path, when we did a post before, and we said post with graph path me feed, that was going to a specific place, me feed. When we're taking it for a specific object like tango, instead of me feed, you put in tango, your verb. And then it's the same thing, the parameters, and then handle the result. Big thing here, you need to define, when you're on the Facebook developer portal, you need to define what your verb is, like tango, and what the actions are for that. Same thing, if you don't define it, it's going to fail. But if you do define it, it'll post to their wall and it'll say, I don't know, Marcus tangoed with this classified, right? It'll show it exactly as you like it. And the big part here, the second big part of why I said you need a backend server is you need to specify, what a tango is on Facebook side, but you also need to specify on your side what a tango is. Like, one of the parameters they asked you for will be the URL for the information on the tango, the tango item. So you need to provide that from your server. Cool. But good thing is, with all these, if you fail, it'll give you an error. And it'll say error failed, invalid parameters. If it passes, it'll work beautifully. Cool. Well, that's the bulk of the presentation. Remember, the big things with this are you need to request information. You need to make sure your app can handle opening from Facebook, that it handles killing the app. You need to handle login information. And then when you're doing your posts, you can only log it, when you do your posts, remember that's very beholden to what you request permission for, like what you can write. But hopefully this helped a lot. Hopefully it's a good start. If you need more, there is a tutorial. You do, it should hopefully be up to date by the time you get to it, but you just do developers.facebook.com, docs, tutorial, iOS SDK tutorial. That's very specific to the iOS, but if you go into tutorials, there's an iOS one right there. If you need to contact me, you can just email me, info@devatelier.com. You can also access my website, devatelier.com. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you all learned a lot. I had a lot of fun giving this presentation. So, see you next time. Bye.